Lovely speaker who came all the way from Laguna Beach, Miss Kelly.
I'm Kelly. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you so much. It's been a really fun, great time, and I really am. Thank you so much for the corsage, and thank you for. I'm a gusher, so this will take about 2 hours, and then I'll talk. But anyway, thank you so much for the basket. Thank you so much to James for asking me to do this. I can't brag enough about my hostess, Cassie. She has been prompt. She is wearing a dress. She has water in her car. She's in a good mood. She brags about her sponsor, rightly so. I think she did all 12 steps in like 15 minutes, and she is amazing. I am not kidding, but I just want to say thank you so much for the beautiful room. And I had this lovely view, you know, of the river and the geese and so forth. And it's been just, you know, a remarkable, terrific thing. I love the little tiny big book that you gave me in the basket. I love the glass heart. Everything has just been so lovely. And I want to say thank you so much to phenomenal messages and speakers that came before me. Pat, who I've known for years and years, and to Danny, who I've heard of for many years, and now I got to meet him and I got to hear his phenomenal message. And so anyway, thank you very, very much. It's been a delight to meet all of you. Anyway, I'm going to tell on somebody. We had kind of a lovely we had this little synergy, the four of us up here. And there's somebody prior to me getting to the podium, I won't say who, made this comment, and she made this wonderful gesture, and she said, you know, these alcoholics, you know, we gotta get them in line, we gotta smack them around a little bit, you know, we gotta really make them mind us. And so I turned to all of them, I said, you know, this is turning into a great women's meeting back here, forget my speaking, let's go behind the curtain and get a resentment and a big book and a pot of coffee, and we're in business. So yeah. So anyway, thank you so much to these lovely three women, too. They've been absolutely wonderful. My sobriety date is September 26, 1984, and my home group is the Bellflower Big Book Group, and my sponsor is a woman named Glenda R. And I will just jump right into it. I love being drunk on my face. I love alcohol. I love not being tipsy, not being kind of high, not being kind of out of control. I love being drunk. And there's a great speaker named Charlie C. in my area who says he drank to get there. There is a zone that I drink to get to. And as soon as I get there, I'm in heaven. When I took my first drink when I was 11, I had a feeling inside of me. I didn't know what it was. I could not articulate it. I could not put a frame around it, but it felt like there was a broken sewer line inside of me, and when you looked in my eyes, you could smell the stench. And you knew that something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was, and you didn't know what it was, but there was something horribly wrong inside of me. And then when I took that first drink, it was gone. When I drink, I feel bulletproof. I feel seamless. I feel it gives me chutzpah. I get confidence that I have never had. I feel like Superwoman. And I don't know, other than, you know, there hasn't really been anything other than alcohol that has ever given me that feeling. Now, if you're new, let me qualify that the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous have given me a new freedom and a new happiness. And there is a new there that I get to as a result of working the program of AA. But alcohol, I am different. I'm not a heavy drinker. I'm not a drug addict. I am not a social drinker. I am an alcoholic. And the reason that I know that I am one is because of what alcohol does for me, not necessarily what it does to me, but what it does for me. And also I know that I'm an alcoholic because your program works so well for me. It just takes a long time. So I had a weird childhood. I grew up in Southgate and Seal Beach and Long Beach, all areas of Los Angeles. And it was kind of a strange childhood. There was 6 marriages between my 2 parents, and it was a revolving door of stepmothers and stepfathers and siblings, step-siblings, and all of this chaos. And so I grew up with a lot of insecurity and really a lot of anger about, I don't know who my family is. And I felt weird because back in the early 60s, not that many families had divorce in them. And so there were two camps of alcoholism in my upbringing. And my father was kind of an interesting guy. He was sort of a poor man's Hugh Hefner. He was this dirt poor kid from Glendale. And he grew up and he owned a sports car dealership in La Cañada, which is up kind of in the foothills above Los Angeles. So in that, sports car dealership, he sold Lotus Elan and MGs and Mini Coopers when they were first here in the 1960s. And in those days, it was very glamorous to do that. And so he sold sports cars to Anne Margaret and Ally McGraw and producers and film people and collectors and so forth. And so being this dirt poor kid from Glendale and being an alcoholic, when I saw him drink his Rob Roys and his martinis, it was glamorous. Drinking was very, very glamorous. Glamorous when people would come by the dealership and they would, think nothing of spending back in those days, $15,000 for a new Lotus. He also raced all over the world, and so he raced on every continent. So there was that camp of drinking in my childhood. He dated exotic women, and he just had this sort of fancy clothes and fancy people, and this kind of lavish lifestyle. On the other side of the street was my mom, who married. She was not an alcoholic, but she married a guy who was an electrician, and he drank at this horrible low-bottom bar in Southgate called the Lido. I will never forget the Lido, because he drank there every single day. And so it was much more kind of like gritty, and you'd go in and it was like sawdust and, throw up on the floor. And he would bring home his lower companions, whose names were Short Dog and Half Hand and Steamboat and, Chainsaw and... So there was that camp of alcoholics, and there's my dad's camp of alcoholics, and it was just, I definitely wanted what my dad had, because when he drank, he made it look glamorous. And so I wanted that broken sewer line inside of me to not exist anymore. And so, there was just all of this chaos and all of this drinking, and, when I drank finally, thank God I drank finally at 11, that broken sewer line went away. I mean, it was completely removed. And I remember the feeling. It was like, I never want to feel that way again. I always want to feel like this. And so, I went on my merry way. There is, spoiler alert here, no arrests, no trouble with the law. I don't, I don't have any crash and burn AA stories. I was never a rock hoe, unfortunately. I missed out on a lot of fun. The kind of alcoholic I am is I drink, and back in the early days when there was VHS and there was not cable TV, what I would do, here's how I drink to qualify. I love Jack Daniels. That is my thing. I like Canadian whiskey, Canadian Club. Anything brown from Canada will do it for me. And so I would drink, a fifth of Jack Daniels every day. I would come home from work and I would drink, and about 3 a.m. I would finally, kind of quasi pass out. And before there was cable, there was UHF and VHS. And the only thing that you could really get on those channels at 3 a.m. were either like ultra-right religious, people proselytizing, or you could get bullfights from Mexico, or you could get the reruns of the Three Stooges, and I love the Three Stooges. And so I would get really, really hammered, and I would drink, and I would watch the Three Stooges, and you know how you get when, you think that you're the all-knowing goddess of, what's actually the real purpose of the Three Stooges, and my thing was, I know for a fact that there is a homoerotic subtext between Shep and Curly, and that was all it took. And that was me as an alcoholic woman. I am totally with Pat, the rocking chair and the purple bathrobe, that was it. I have no intervention from the law. Nobody talked to me about my drinking. None of that happened. I am a boring, morose, suicidal alcoholic woman. I like to drink by myself. I hate to drink in public, and I don't go to bars. I don't want to be picked up. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want people to see the way that I drink. I don't want when I drink, I stumble and I swerve, and I don't want to be bothered with men when I drink, because I don't mix business and pleasure. When I am drinking, I am all over that. That is the only thing that's going to happen. I am sorry. So that's me. So anyway, I've always wanted to be one of those AA speakers who have a really amazing crash and burn story. I have none. So I will talk about the best part of my story, I think, is how I got to AA, because that's really when the magic began to happen for me. So anyway, some things began to happen. My mom died when I was 15. She died very suddenly. She had pancreatic cancer. And so back in the day, this was the early 70s, late 60s, there was no therapy for the kids, and there was no hospice or anything like that. So she was gone. I mean, she got sick for a month, and then she passed away. And I was left with an alcoholic stepfather and a 5-year-old little brother. So his alcoholism, my stepfather's alcoholism, went through the roof when she died. A lot of things began to happen, and so now he was single. His ex-wife, who was a tornado, a terrible, outrageous anti-MAME blackout drunk, started coming over, and so they would get drunk together. They started going to bed together. A lot of weirdness began to happen, and so that happened. And my drinking was not ugly or sloppy from the very beginning. And what happened for me was when she died, I got a lot of responsibility. So I became the mom. And they said to me, basically, if you're going to drink at home with us, because you will. That's okay for you to drink that way. And that's a really weird thing now to say to a kid, but I felt very responsible and proud of myself. I've always felt responsible and especially proud of the way that I drink. I'm, being mom now, and then a year after she dies, he remarries, and he remarries his old girlfriend. And they were drinking buddies, and she was a very, low bottom alcoholic. And anyway, it was crazy and it was insane, and I wanted to get the hell out of there. And so what happened for me was I had a boyfriend at the time. We graduated from high school when we were 20. We got married and we moved, and we left Southgate. He had a broken sewer line in him too, and we didn't want to be who we were. And so we want to sort of get the hell out of this hideous place that we live in. We want to go be someone. If you have a broken sewer line in you, if you have alcoholism, for me, the way it manifests in me is I can't stand who I really am. I hope you never find out who I really am, so I'm going to go create some kind of persona over here so that you don't find that out, and I will drink toward that persona. And so I made this, thing, we kind of crafted this life, that we were going to go do. And so we got married and we moved to Seattle. And Seattle is where I did most of my heavy drinking, all of my heavy drinking, and where I crashed and burned and got sober, and where we went. And so when we went there, he wanted to go to graduate school, so he got into the PhD program at University of Washington to get his doctorate in marine biology. So he's working on his broken sewer line in that way. And what I always wanted to do when I was in my early 20s is I really wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And so by the time we got to Seattle, I had maybe a year of college or two or something like that. But if you've got that going on inside of you, the way that I drank, I should go back a little bit, it made me feel, it gave me power. It was the first power greater than myself that I had ever known. And so I didn't have really a first step when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, because what an unmanageability. I could drink anybody that I know under the table. And I could drink any man that I know under the table. And so there's no powerlessness here. And so there was no first step for me, no obvious first step, because I didn't have crash and burn, interaction with the cops. I didn't have kids that, were taken away by CPS or anything like that. So there were no big hallmarks, no big markers of you're an alcoholic. Nobody talked to me about my drinking. So we get up to Seattle, and he gets into graduate school, and what I wanted to do is be a reporter, and so I have only 2 years of college, And I decided to do this because it's me we're talking about. So I just said, who needs to go to college? Who needs to do an internship? Who needs to really find out how to do this? I watch the 6 o'clock news. I can go be a reporter like that. And so what I did was I created a false resume that indicated I had a whole lot of experience in, print journalism, and I, invented a degree that I got somewhere on the East Coast. And I just shot this stupid, ruse around to newspapers, in Seattle. And, in the late 70s, early 80s, you could get away with that. Now you can't. But I made up this whole litany of stuff that I'd never done in my whole life. And I just took it to various editors. And somebody was stupid enough to hire me. And so now I am a reporter. And so I, start going to work, and it's like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, and I have no clue how to do any of this. So I'm going back home. At the end, I get hired on. In Seattle, there's this wonderful community called Ballard, and it's kind of the locus of the Norwegian fishing fleet, or the fishing fleet in the Pacific Northwest. And so anyway, for some odd reason, I don't know why this newspaper did this, but they needed a reporter to cover the commercial fishing fleet beat, and that was me. Okay, so now I'm a kid from LA, I don't know a rock from a gill net, and I'm going out now, and I'm covering this big economic issue in the Pacific Northwest, salmon runs, and it's market prices and so forth, and I'm going out on the trawlers, and I'm interviewing the Norwegian fishermen. Not a bad gig, just side note. And I'm getting drunk with them, and I'm falling off the trawlers, and and then I'm going back, to the office to write these stories, and I'm hungover and I'm drunk, and I'm just making stuff up. I'm just doing research over here, and I'm just writing stuff. And it was a tiny little newspaper, so nobody really, kind of caught on, but I just made it sound sort of flowery and good, and I was just. It was so hard when you're an alcoholic. It is so hard to lead a double life. And so what I was doing was I was trying to be someone over here, and the only thing that kept me going was that fifth of Jack Daniels every single day. And the more that I drank, the more chutzpah I got. And not only did I get that chutzpah and that confidence, because now, I really was kind of getting the hang of this, and I was getting better. And so they put me on bigger assignments, and so I drink that, fifth of Jack Daniels every day, pass out, get up, watch the Three Stooges, go to work, and then, do the whole thing over again. So now it's kind of like I'm getting, my sea legs here, if you will, and I am, getting to know how to do this. And so they start putting me on bigger assignments. One of the assignments they put me on was there was a big prostitution problem in Seattle in the early 80s. And so somehow I got in with the vice unit of the Seattle Police Department, and they took me on their rounds to, do busts, and they actually put me undercover. I worked with another female cop, and we literally, we walked this little street in Seattle so that I could interact with knowing what it's like, and I wrote about that, and I won an award for investigative journalism. Everything that I was doing, that's called malpractice. And so I don't know how in the world this was going on, but the more I went, it is a progressive disease, and so as this is unfolding, my disease is progressing, and so I don't recall any line that I crossed, but because so many people in Alcoholics Anonymous have these big markers of prison or losing a limb or something like that, something really dramatic. I was just doing what I saw everybody else do. Everybody that I knew drank. The guys, the people at University of Washington, the other grad students that my husband were colleagues with, we all drank. We all drank, and we all drank a lot. So it was in my environment, but there was no, AA back then, 34 years ago, was not that prominent, and the disease of alcoholism and so forth was not that, there wasn't that much public information about it. So I'm, on my merry way. And the weird thing is about, at least my story, is that my world got smaller and darker, and I got more suicidal. And there's a big bus system in in Seattle, and I just wanted to walk in front of one of the metro buses. And that's how, it got worse for me. And so now what's happening too is that, I'm starting to get in trouble with my job because my disease is progressing. And so what I did was frequently I'd go and I'd interview somebody, and I'd come back to the office and I'd look at my notes and I'd go, "You are way too boring." And I would write the story, and I wouldn't write what they said. I'd write what they could have said if they were much more interesting. And they were much more interesting, the way that I made them sound, because they were really boring. And so that's what I did frequently. And people's attorneys don't like that so much. So anyhow, I did get called onto the carpet, and I really did get into trouble. And I hopped over, to a couple different other newspapers. I did work for one newspaper that was owned by the Washington Post. Now we are looking at people who have MBAs. We're looking at people who are on their game and then some. I'm working with people who go to work every day in a suit and a tie, and they're winning big-time prizes. And I'm a stumbling drunk, and I'm starting to be an embarrassment, and I'm starting to be a patsy. And I am doing my utmost to try to hold on to this lie that I'm telling, and this lie that I'm trying to portray. So what happens for me is it does get darker and worse, and I start having some domestic violence issues with my husband. I am drinking every single day. Now that, it just is getting worse, and I'm getting very, very suicidal, and I don't know why Jack Daniels is no longer working. I don't know, but I am drinking more and more and more. And it's getting worse, and I'm sobbing and not knowing why. And I went to a marriage therapist and tried to work. I only did, and I ended up having an affair with him. And so, I was a mess, and so I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that I had the disease of alcoholism. I didn't know what it was. I thought that alcoholism, the only thing I knew about it was, and AA was, The Days of Wine and Roses, great film. And so, everybody in that film, they're genteel, and the women are wearing, four-ply cashmere and pearls, and the men are in their, cardigans and skinny ties, and everybody's sitting around this sort of civil, semicircle, and somebody's at the podium talking about how they bumped their head on the table, and now they drank a martini. Now they're in AA. This is when I'm thinking AA, probably should be. My view of AA was an alcoholic is that they drink Mad Dog. They live on Skid Row. They're dirty old men. That kind of stuff. They're on the street. They're what we used to call bums instead of homeless, and it's that. And so I didn't have a thought about that I need to go to AA. I just needed to kill myself. And I was getting closer and closer to really getting very hot water. I mean, there was a lawsuit I was a lawsuit waiting to happen. So how I got into AA was this, and it really, I think pretty much everybody in AA, and I think in this room specifically, because we're all here together for this weekend for a reason. We're here because of some kind of divine appointment where, a power greater than yourself said, it's time, you can't drink one more drink, and we're all here, and we kind of got the gift. And we can't control, I don't think, how we get there. It's like it's either a cop, it's a fist fight, it's a divorce, it's a run-in with the law, it's something. And so for me, God had a very unusual way of getting me into Alcoholics Anonymous. I was getting into trouble. And right around I don't know what year it was, but 1983, Betty Ford, God rest her soul, had admitted that she was an alcoholic, and the media went absolutely hog wild on doing stories about alcoholics, because that was the raging thing. And so everybody was looking for, adolescent alcoholics and elderly alcoholics and dog alcoholics and, Frankenstein alcoholics. And so everybody was doing their alcoholism and addiction story. And people were, getting, that's kind of how you got noticed is, you sort of follow the trend that's happening. And so I thought if I could just find my alcoholic story, maybe I could redeem myself. So weirdly enough, this woman walks into my office one day to drop off the press release, and we began to talk. And she was really remarkable. I mean, she just really had the lights on in her eyes, and she was just a lovely, engaging woman. And we talked. In about 15 minutes, she broke her anonymity to me for some reason. And I started asking her a million questions about what it was like to be an alcoholic, because I had never met one. And so I was just grilling her left and right. It's like, wow, that's really interesting. How long did you drink? What did you drink? I was just, asking all the reporter questions. And so she said, you seem to be very interested in this whole issue of alcoholism. Why don't you write a story about it? And I thought that would be amazingly self-aware of me, a great social service to write a story about alcoholism, and maybe I could find like my alcoholic somewhere and like get myself out of trouble. So it's like so many problems solved by just this one encounter. And so anyway, I decided in my grandiosity that I wouldn't just write a story about alcoholism. I would do a 5-part series, and I would do one on public policy toward alcoholism and, women alcoholics. We got to throw Alcoholics Anonymous in there, and it was just like my, pathway. It was my card out of jail. So I called central office in Seattle, and I said, I'm a reporter. I want to do a story about Alcoholics Anonymous. And they go, we think that's wonderful. We're so glad to hear that. And we think you should go to the Fremont Fellowship. So the Fremont Fellowship is a howl at the moon meeting. Somebody's nodding their head back there. It glows in the dark. And it is a howl at the moon meeting. And I think it's been around for much longer than AA has, maybe 150 years. And it's a trip. It's still there. And so anyway, so they said, yeah, here's where the meeting is. And so I go to the meeting, and I'm thinking I'm going to be, see Lee Remick and, Jack Lemmon and all this. And I walk in this room, and I swear to God, I could not believe what I was walking into. So I walk in, and it's like in the old halls, you guys remember this, the long-timers, in the back of the room, they had like those old gigantic headshots of, Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson. So there's like these two glaring, I don't know what they were, people, photos of these people are in the back of the room. I don't know who they are. It was kind of like some futuristic weird thing. And I walk in the room, you could smoke in those days, so like this gray, cloud. And lo and behold, there is nobody who looks anything like Jack Lemmon, certainly nobody who looks like Lee Remick. And so I walk in there, and these guys are lining the wall. First of all, the first tip-off was you walk up and on the sidewalk, there's like 900 mean Harley Davidsons, parked outside. And so you walk in the room, and there are these guys who like have really frightening, people have tattoos now, but 35 years ago, these were frightening prison tattoos. And here I was, this, I was a reporter, and so I walk in, and these guys have frightening scars and a bunch of tattoos, and they're, all their Harleys and stuff, and I take my seat in the back of the room, and I take out my pad and my pencil, and I am writing down everybody's share, and, these had these outrageous shares, like, I just got sprung from San Quentin. I took a hatchet to a family of 5, but, in a blackout. But my, my sponsor said, just make amends for it when you get out. And don't worry about it. Just do your first step in prison. We'll work on it. And this other guy, I swear to God, he raised his hand. He said, yeah. I took it was some outrageous thing. He took a chainsaw to his wife and in a blackout, and he goes, yeah, but now we're, everything's fine. We worked it out, and we're getting remarried. And it was just like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, I'm so glad I'm not an alcoholic, because this is outrageous. But I thought, as I'm thinking, that I'm writing all this down, scribbling all it down furiously, it was like, they're going to eat this one with a knife and a fork back in the office. Like, I have struck, gold here. So I go back, I write this stupid 5-part series, and the thing about Alcoholics Anonymous, and get this avalanche of hate mail from people in the meeting. Can you guess why? Here's why. I always take a commercial break for the 11th tradition when I tell this story, because at that meeting, I sat in the back of the room, and I took out my pad and my pen, and I was writing down everyone's share and writing down their name, and it was all in the newspaper the next day. Yeah, that's what we call pretty heinous disrespect for the 11th tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I study the traditions, I speak at traditions, conferences and workshops and so forth, and I take my sponsees through the traditions for that reason, basically, because I didn't know, nobody at central office told me, don't use our name, don't record it or anything like that. I didn't know any better, and so I went there, and it was a horrible thing, because you can imagine, so-and-so said that his ex-wife did blah, 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 and he admitted at the meeting, that he killed somebody or whatever. I mean, a prosecuting attorney, an ex-wife, even a hitman could have, put the name and the story together, and I've really screwed up somebody's day big time. So it is very important, if you're new or even not so new, to embrace and learn and practice the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And why? Because they keep it from, they want to protect it from idiots like me, who break people's anonymity, whether they know it or not, or break their own anonymity, and they don't know that they're doing it. They don't know the harm to Alcoholics Anonymous. Anybody should be able to come into a meeting and say what they need to say, and have it be a safe place. So I did make direct amends to the Fremont Fellowship. There's a guy in Oceanside, was a guy named Cliff Roach, and one of his sponsees suggested a way of doing that, and I did that, and I made amends to the Fremont Fellowship. And it really got me into the traditions once I got into AA. So what happened for me was my drinking got worse, and I had no idea what was to come. And so I went to another therapist who was a woman, and she said to me in so many words, I think you're an alcoholic. She put it in very gently. I think you're an alcoholic. She didn't say that, but she put it in very gently. She said, how much are you drinking lately? And I said, the normal amount. And she said, well, I'm going to ask you to do something now that you're really going to hate me for. And it's like, you gotta be kidding. Don't even say the words. I can't fathom that you would call me an alcoholic, because I can handle my booze. I mean, look at all that I've gotten away with. And, I'm styling. So, I was but it scared the living, daylights out of me. And I went, and I didn't know where else to go. So I went right back to the Fremont Fellowship, and that became my home group. And, God, I mean, this was 1984, and, those bikers and those biker chicks and everything, they really knew how to take care of their newcomers. It was really, it was a great first year, because it was just nothing. I lost everything. There was nothing left in my life but Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went in there, and I, bonded with those people, and I just started going to meetings. And what happened for me was I did get divorced. I was fired from my job. In the first 18 months of my sobriety, I didn't kind of get to what the AA was that I walked in on, but I didn't really have a sponsor for a while, and so I went out of my mind. And so I was in a psych unit 3 times, 3 different psych units in 3 different instances over the first 18 months, because I was very, very, very suicidal. And I lost everything. I was confused. I was broke. I had no car. I was unemployable. And so when I got into AA, it was 1984, and probably many of you remember this if you were sober around that time. There was a movement going through Alcoholics Anonymous at that time that had nothing to do with the Big Book of AA. It had nothing to do with the 12 steps, with the 12 traditions, nothing to do with the pillars of Alcoholics Anonymous that many of us practice in our daily lives. It had everything to do with bonding with your inner child, making sure that you brought your teddy bear to the meeting, making sure that the teddy bear was speaking for you in the meetings. You had to find the right crystals to meditate to. You had to name the animals on your inner totem. It was every kind of, airy-fairy, ooga-booga, magic fairy dust type of take on AA that you can imagine. Now, let me take a break here and say, whatever is keeping you sober, if you do any of that, if you do all of that, it is not my business to get into what works for you. My job here as the speaker is to talk about what worked for me. And so I fell in with these people who in 1984 were listening to, the Alcoholic Family, programs on PBS and the tapes and, the 12-step gurus out there who were doing their take on AA. And publishing a lot of books, and there was, codependency stuff, and therapy, and all that stuff. And there was a movement within Seattle AA that was that, and I fell in with that movement. And I fell in with that movement because it was the easier, softer way. And man, these people looked great. I mean, they, wore the right leather jackets, and they had the right haircuts, and they, drove the right BMWs, and they sounded good because they were in touch. At the meetings, and they were an attraction physically, and they were, all the women were working that program of New Boyfriend, Strength, and Hope. So that was really the attraction for me. So anyway, I fell in with this group of people, and we went off and we did our thing. And we would go to meetings, but we would share our insight, strength, and hope. We would share our emotional discoveries and so forth. And so, meanwhile, the funny thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that fundamental, good old practical, standard, fundamental AA is over here doing its thing. And we're over here doing this alternative thing. And I, as a newcomer, thought that thing was what AA was. And so the long-timers in Seattle are doing their thing over here, and I'm doing this thing over here with these people. And it's really an attraction because they're hip, slick, and cool. And by the way, they had 12 steps in these, in this group over here. But the funny thing about that sponsorship is they were half-measure sponsors who allowed me to take half-measure steps. And they had an inventory in their program, but it had no, funny thing about that inventory is it had no fourth column that we find on page 67 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that asks where were we at fault, where were we selfish, where were we self-seeking, were we dishonest? And so I love that inventory because I don't have to look at my part at all in anything. And what they said to me when I was taking those inventories is that all those bounce checks that you wrote and all those relationships that that didn't work out, all of those employers that you screwed over, all of the lies that you told to get where you were, that is all because of the mom dying, of the 6 marriages between your 2 parents. It's all because of your broken family, et cetera, et cetera. And those certainly may have an impact on one's life if you're in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I bought that, hook, line, and sinker because it didn't really ask me to look at me. Also, that process did not enable me to really make a thorough steps 6, 7, 8, and 9. And that, we called it Virtue Valley in AA back then, steps 4 through 9. So they allowed me to do half measures amends as well. And so these amends were ridiculous, and I will go over them briefly. I would leave amends on voicemail. I had back in those days, they had like the machine voicemail, and so they, sometimes it was 10 seconds is all you got, so you'd have to do it in parts. So, and I had kind of like this form, just a form letter amends that I would send. I never made a direct amends with that kind of AA. My form letter amends was like, hi, you probably remember me, we worked together. And I'm sure you recall that thing that I did 15 years ago. But if you kind of think about it, you kind of started it. So... And it's true. They did start it, and it was their fault, and they are horrible people. And But any sponsor now that would have me make an amends would say, excuse me, I think that you probably have something to do with this, and you need to look at your, what your side of the street is. So anyway, I'm off on my merry, way doing this, and I'd love to tell you that I did that for 30 days, 90 days, whatever. I worked this sort of alternative AA program for 11 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, in the first 3 years, I found him in AA, and we're still together, and him and me, we got together and we really went down that path. I mean, we spent thousands of dollars in therapy. Again, nothing wrong with therapy. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous itself says we have many fine doctors and books, avail yourself of these resources. But we spent thousands of dollars in these alternative programs and therapies and fire walking and, inner child workshops and, aqua therapy and, non-dominant handwriting and all this other stuff. And, we took it to the bank. And so, and the funny thing about the disease of alcoholism that I learned, Clancy has this great thing. He says, we're always either walking toward our next drink or away from our last drink. And I didn't know that the disease of alcoholism progresses even if I am not drinking. It astonished me. I thought that if you put the plug in the jug and you park your butt in a seat of AA and you're just going to meetings, that's it. And yes, meetings are incredibly important. They're vital. But I never bothered to do anything past the third step. So I am living proof for anybody in this room that you can stay physically divorced from alcohol. You can stay physically undrunk for a long time without doing anything that these people tell you to do. Don't get a sponsor, don't take the steps, don't get a commitment. I don't suggest all of that, but here's what happened for me as a cumulative effect of, running it myself. We got married and we moved up and down the West Coast, and we would get resentful because nobody was asking us to speak, so we have to move again. So we were living in the Oakland Hills, and I was working in Silicon Valley. So I had gone back to school and I got my degree. I stopped lying about it. I worked in Silicon Valley during the rush. During the boom, and he had his own business, and so I was driving a Porsche, and we had a house in the Oakland Hills, and you'd think that we had it going on, but just going to meetings and not having serious sponsorship, not using the Big Book ever. Anyway, 11 years sober, this really weird thing happened to me where the yets from my drinking showed up at 11 years sober, stone cold sober, sponsoring women, talking in AA. The yets that I never had when I was drinking start showing up in my life sober. And here's what happened. I was lying, I was cheating, I was stealing, I was getting fired left and right. I had secrets from my husband. I got into legal trouble and I had to hire an attorney to get myself out of legal trouble. I was suicidal. I began to have the broken sewer line come back. And it was like, what the heck? I mean, I'm in AA. I sponsor people. I don't get it. I'm going to a lot of meetings. And I couldn't understand why this was happening with so much time in Alcoholics Anonymous. I told this story a few years ago at a meeting, and this long-timer came up to me. And he said, it wasn't so much that you had 11 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. You had 1 year 11 times over. And it was really stunning because I think that's a really an accurate, portrayal of kind of what I went through. So it's like, I'm getting thirsty. And it has been said before that when an alcoholic is on their way out, they begin to work the 12 steps in reverse. So what happened was, I certainly stopped working with others, and I stopped prayer and meditation because how can there be a God when all this stuff is happening to me? I stopped certainly making amends because nothing was working. And then, if you work your way farther and farther back, I started taking back 6 and 7. Like those things that I gave up that I thought were character defects, they were my strength and they were my chutzpah. And they gave me, confidence. So now I'm taking everything back because I don't have a program and I don't have a God that has replaced alcohol. So what happens for me, and again, that divine appointment, it happened twice. I hit bottom twice in Alcoholics Anonymous. I hit bottom on alcohol when I came in '84, when 11 years passed. I hit bottom on my alcoholism, and it was a different bottom. And so what happened for me was, a friend called me one night, and my friend Eric, he said, You haven't been to a meeting for a long time. Would you like to go to a meeting? The Wow Bench in Berkeley, and I said yes. And so we went to this meeting, and I saw a woman speak again, that divine appointment. I saw this woman speak at the podium, and she talked about the Big Book, and she talked about God, and she said that she was happy being sober, and I had never really had an attraction to a woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I certainly had an attraction to her and her program. So I asked her after the meeting, would you sponsor me? And she said, yes. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get together once a week in Alameda at a coffee shop, and we're going to go through this thing. It's been around the program a lot of years. It's blue. It's called the Big Book. And that's where the program is. It's between page 1 and 164. And I'm going to read a page, and you're going to read a page. And when there's action described in the book, then you're going to take that action. And she said, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is a lot of things, but one thing that it's not is it is not negotiable. And I was just desperate enough, and I was, you know, close enough to a drink to say, yeah. So we get together, and I read a page, and she reads a page. And it's like, oh my God, this book is really powerful. And you know, I am taking the steps out of the Big Book as it is described or suggested by the people who wrote the Big Book. And it's a whole different ballgame. And when we got to the 9th step, I actually had to do a thorough 4-column inventory. And when I did that page 67, you know, column, it was like, yeah, my life is my fault. And the 4 words that came out of that 4th column for me were time to grow up, time to stop being a child, time to grow up, and to be an adult out there, a sober adult in this world. So I went out and I made direct amends, and I made direct amends to people that I don't like. I still don't like them. I'll never like them. But she said, you're going to do it, and I did it. And I'm glad I did, because, you know, it's funny how AA works. You know, my inner architecture turned on its axis. And I didn't see that one coming. It's like you can do all the steps, and then it seems like nothing happens, and I still don't, you know, I wanted to do the steps and have money, property, and prestige, and that didn't happen. And when I did those inventory, and I did the inventory and I made the direct amends, it had a profound impact, but it didn't look like it on the outside. So if you're being asked by your sponsor to take the steps, trust me, it is a really, it's an amazing outcome, but it's very important to realize that this is a lifelong process that pays remarkable dividends in long term. And so, anyway, I did that, and it was an amazing experience. My husband hit bottom at the same time, and he got a wonderful sponsor whose name was Glenn L., and he had 38 years of sobriety when we met him. He sponsored 1 million guys, and so he was sober in the desert with Pat. Pat knew him. Pat and Vince knew him for many years, and he was just an amazing example of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so we fell in love with him, and we fell in love with his program. And, you know, he would pile his sponsees in his red van. He lived in Northern California, and he would take us down to Pacific Group and go see that meeting, take us down to Bellflower, take us to the Desert Powwow, take us to, you know, conferences like this. And we fell in love when we got in the middle of AA. And it was an amazing experience. So if you're new, stick with that kind of person. I mean, find the long-timers who are serious about Alcoholics Anonymous and do what they do. It's pretty darn easy and pretty simple. Do what they do. So I want to read. I'm going to finish by reading something from the Big Book that kind of summarizes all of this. But I want to talk and finish with a story that I always finish with. You know, when I was about 27 years sober, we had moved to Los Angeles, and we started going to a couple of big meetings. And, you know, at some of these big meetings, I began to get real resentments toward the long-timers. I know that's a shocker, but I could not. I just really got very, very judgmental of the long-timers in one of the groups that I was going to, and I didn't like the you know, the kind of the coffee clatchness of it. You know, that you're okay if you're sponsored by this person and you're out if you're not. And I just saw nothing but issues and problems, and it was their fault, and they were evil, and they needed to die. And so what? what happened for me was this thing kept eating away at me, and this thought came to me, which wasn't of my thinking. And the thought was, maybe, just maybe, it's not them, maybe it's you. And I was sponsored at the time by Millie G. She's a long-time sober woman in Pacific Group, and she is a phenomenal example. So I called Millie and I said, I hate all these people at my home group, and it's justifiable. And she said, and I said, when I had this thought, and I thought maybe it's not them, maybe it's me. And she said, yeah, it's you. And so she said, I want you to make an 8-step list, and I want you to, in this sort of weird 11 years, I had made only half measures amends, and I didn't go back and really review them. And then I also swept a lot of needed amends under the carpet and dismissed having to do them. So she said, I want you to make an 8-step list, and I want you to put those people on your list that you need to, that you need to make amends to, because it sounds to me like you've got a lot of ground glass in you, and it's coming out in this way. It's coming out in judgment of others. And so I agreed. And the first people that were on that list were my ex-in-laws. I love them. They were like the parents I never had. They were amazing people. I loved them very much. They were my drinking buddies along with my husband. And when we got divorced, I turned on my heels and I left, and I never said goodbye, and I never thanked them. And so they were the first people on my list. They live in a very small little town in Colorado called Montrose. It's about 4 hours outside of Aspen. And they have a very unusual name, last name. And so anyway, I Googled them, and I just was praying to God that I would not find them. And of course, they were the first people that came up, name, address, and phone number. And they live in this, odd little town called Montrose. And I thought, I really hope, I'm gonna try to negotiate with my sponsor that I don't have to get on a plane and go make direct amends, because you got to take 2 flights into Denver, then you got to go over the hideous, mountain range in a tiny little plane, and then the whole 9, and it's a 4-hour drive to Montrose. So I was like, I hope that she will let me get away with the letter of amends. So as I'm rehearsing my negotiation in my head, this guy calls me and he says, hi, I'm calling from the North Mountain Roundup in Aspen, Colorado, and we'd love to have you speak at our conference. We'd love to have you come out and speak at our conference next month. And I was like, I hate God. I hate this stupid book. I hate all of you. I hate God, and I hate AA. And so anyway, I got on the plane, and I went to the conference, and I drove to Montrose, and I went to go see them. I hadn't seen them for 25 years, and it was amazing. It was just very powerful. Everybody was crying and sobbing, and the amends came out, and I made the amends, and then I came back to my home group, and it was really weird because there's a kind of spiritual calculus, I think, that happens in doing the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the weirdest thing happened, I do this work way the heck over here with this resentment, and this, I do the work way over here with this long-time amends that I have owed. And I'm doing this work over here in Aspen, Colorado from 25 years ago with these people way the heck over here. And when I got back to my home group, it had an effect on these resentments in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting way over here in Los Angeles. So what happened for me was this spiritual, ooga booga calculus that happens, and you don't know where it's going to take you. I was talking to James about this before the meeting. When you just take the black parts of the big book, what are the black parts of the big book? It's the printed part. And so I do the work over here, and over here, the weirdest thing begins to happen. I begin to lose my resentment toward them. In fact, I started to see them with a new pair of glasses. I mean, I saw them as they get there early, they stay late, they sponsor more people than I do, they've been at this longer than I have, they help more people. I see them work very actively with the new person. And I don't. I can't wait to get in my car and get, home and go to bed. And so, I began to see them in a new light. And not only that, is I began to see the newcomer girls at the back of the room, which I hadn't seen before, going to this meeting for like 90 years. And it's like, I bet they would like to be welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I began to do that. And so there is just this, I think it's really natural that a lot of people just do not want to do the steps. They don't want to do the program. They don't want to bother with the book, all of that stuff. And yet the strangest thing happens when you do that. And I don't have time to tell you everything that happened as a result of what I did in terms of that work, just doing what Bill and Bob wrote. And so, our financial issue got resolved thanks to, Pat and her husband had something that, kind of a class that they did called finance class, and we got into that and we dove into it, and now, we don't have those issues. But I believe I used to have horrible work issues. That isn't the case anymore. I don't have to get fired anymore, and I've been fired many times sober. And had a lot of, before doing the steps, I put my mom and dad's face on every single authority figure I had. And so all these things somehow were resolved as just a result of doing these 12 things. It was really strange. And I think it's summarized really well in the book. So there's one of my favorite pages in the big book is on page 27, and I always wrap up reading this because I think it summarizes our journey through the steps and kind of what the outcome is. In this part of the book, Dr. Jung is being quoted, and he's talking about his observance of what happens when we begin to do this program. He says this, here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. And I think that that is what my experience is of doing all this, and thank you.